Hey there, guys and girls, and welcome to another episode of The Finnovator with me, Stuart Bell. And the topic we're going to cover off today has become more and more of an important one, particularly with the practices I'm working with. And frankly, from what I'm getting feedback on all around the place. Here in Australia, as a result of a bunch of legislative change that has been kicked down the pike, not all of it great, to be really, really honest, we have seen the reduction in the number of advisors in our industry over that period of around about 50%. Now, in watching a presentation by Stephen Prendeville at the tail end of the year before last, I believe it was, he pulled out a bunch of statistics which sort of shone a light on what those exits were all about. And in truth, the statistics tell us that the majority of people who left the industry were those who, from a compliance perspective, could possibly be said were more likely to be on the lower end of things than the higher end. By the way, that's not saying that everybody that left the industry wasn't a good advisor. We're just saying the statistics indicated that there are a larger proportion of those who had been flagged as having less compliant advice than those who had more compliant advice. It also indicated as well that a lot of people who left the industry in that period were more likely to be employees or working for institutions than they were business owners. And in fact, the number of business owners who actually left the industry tended to be quite small in comparison. That aside, this has all led to an issue because the demand for advice hasn't increased, and if anything, over the COVID period, we saw an abrupt turnaround. Whereas pre-COVID, advice tended to be a bit of a whipping boy for the media, and suddenly it flipped over. And I think a lot of that's got to do with some of the positive changes in the industry that have gone through, even though some of it has been a little bit heavy-handed and at times sort of slapdash and hit and hope. But hiring is what this is all about. Because when you've got a business that is ultimately constrained in some way, shape or form by the number of hours that it takes to deliver advice and to work with clients, which I'd say since I started doing what I'm doing, it's definitely been the case. And I know it's going back the other way, but it's still a factor. Obviously, one of the impacts of this has been over the last 5 years, a massive increase in the cost of advice. And that, for the most part, has been something that businesses have had to pass on, much like any other business would. But ultimately, at some point, as a business, if you want to grow, you can refine, you can get more efficient, you can work with your pricing. But if you aim to work through what we call the dangerous middle growth phase in advice business, you need to hire. Now, that big preamble is because hiring is one of those areas that, frankly, the statistics often show, is often sort of hit with as much as a 50% failure rate. And the problem with that is when 50% of the people you're hiring are basically not fit and they're not going to do the job, that's a huge expense. I remember the first time I did the numbers on this with a client way back, we indicated that hiring the wrong person had cost that business $250,000 in wages, recruitment fees, lost revenue, underperformance, a whole bunch of stuff. And if you knew that every single time you're hiring, the cost to your business could be $250,000, $350,000 lost, you can see how this becomes a big issue. Thankfully, the book that I read, which has just shone a light on this from a data-driven point, was The A Method for Hiring. It's called Who? The A Method for Hiring by Geoff Smart. And this module drew heavily from that. And it's formed the basis of a system that is I put in place and I've worked with businesses on to help them identify the right people to hire, approach the process from the right perspective, a data-driven perspective, and, avoid falling into some of the common traps that I guess the more artistic forms of interviewing can often go down the path of doing. We actually developed a tool that supports it called Role Audit. At roleaudit.com, and it forms a huge part of the work we do in coaching, both in terms of role definition, delegation, systemization. So it's a real Swiss Army knife tool that is involved in a whole bunch of projects. Anyway, with that in mind, long preamble, this is Inspired Hiring. And if you have hired in the past and made mistakes, if you are planning to hire, or if you just want to make sure that you are scoping out the right roles and giving yourself the best opportunity to get the best candidates, this is going to be incredibly useful. As well as is always the case, if you want to sort of access more of the content around this, you want to see the visuals, you want to get involved, you can jump in and register to join our success portal at success.ourdairy.com.au, become part of our community and get access to that and a whole bunch more. With that long amble over and done with, I'm going to hand over. Here's Inspired Hiring. So inspired hiring. This is one of those modules, as I think I've said before, which when you don't feel you need it, like you're not hiring or you feel like you've got a process that works, it's not going to interest you. It's not going to be something as you go through the curriculum, you're going to jump in and go, oh, I'm going to watch that just for fun, unless you really want to know about it. Similarly, the moment you need it, often you might not have the time to jump in and watch it because you're in the hiring process. But I'll tell you what, when you do make the wrong hire or when you don't get it quite right, being able to go through this content and understand where you went wrong, how to do it better next time, and ultimately how to build a system behind it so you get good people time and time again, and you filter out the ones that just aren't part of your future. Make this, as you can see at the end of it, I'll circle back and ask you, this make this, for me, one of the most valuable modules and skills and systems to have in your business. So let's just jump in and I'll run through it and I'll give you as much of the practice as I possibly can. So where does this fit in the whole scheme of things? Well, for me, I mean, I've had a conversation with a number of you. I personally think that as soon as you hit that phase, the profit phase, you should be hiring your first back office manager, business manager, EA, VA. I hate the word VA because it suggests virtual assistant, but there's really nothing virtual about the people you're working with. They're real people. They just don't happen to be in your location, as I know you'll be familiar with. But for me, I kind of think that if you reach that phase in your business where you're starting to grow your team, you're going from 3 or 4 people to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you don't have this sorted, the impact it's going to have on your business is fairly significant. So in terms of the journey to leverage, the time to sort of sit down and make sure you make this part of what you do is at that system space. It's one of those key, you can see hiring processes right there. It's one of those key processes that is going to make your journey from a profit-driven foundational business, lifestyle business, through to a scalable business model, something that it can run without you much, much easier. It's really, really vital. So to that end, here's the big idea. What I'm going to show you here today is not content that I came up with myself. It's content that is based on some experiences that I've had down the years, but it's based on working with a number of different really good experts in the space, people like Susan Rochester, who is an absolute gun when it comes to stuff like that. She's gone on one of our podcasts, I think, with her. But if I looked at one book that kind of provides a lot of the framework for this, it's this one. It was published back in 2008, so I can't believe it's been around that while, but it's still as relevant today as it was back then. And it's called The Who, the A Method for Hiring, from Geoff Smart and Randy Street. And what I love about this book is, for me, traditionally, particularly in the early 2000s, HR was one of those things that management got really close to management, and it became really, really important. And a lot of what was spoken about in terms of, hiring for fit and developing people, when you actually dive under the surface, you realize there's not a lot of science behind it. Classic case and example, performance agreements. This whole idea is what you start with a business objective. And then what you do is you break down the business objectives into marketing objectives and sales objectives, and you give those to the teams and they manage it. This idea that if you break down the objectives into smaller objectives, it ultimately feeds the business achieving the greater objectives. And the thing is, this whole management by objective philosophy that went through the sort of the business community so strongly back then was based on nothing. There was no evidence to show that it was actually proven to work. And in actual fact, we've later learned that's just not the way that people work. But this book it was based on data. It was based on insight, and it was based on looking at the problem from an analytical point of view. And to be specific about it, here's the insights. The book was based on more than 1,300 hours of interviews undertaken by their own claim, 20 billionaires and 300 CEOs. So at the time, it made it the largest research study of its kind ever undertaken. And it identified this beautiful statistic that on average, from the data set taken, managers made hiring mistakes 50% of the time. And each mistake generally cost the business 15 times the person's base salary. In other words, they found that the hiring process that the most businesses were implementing were no better than tossing a coin and hoping that the result was right. And they discovered that the mistakes behind that led to this 50-50, 50% failure rate was that there was a lack of clarity of the role required going into it. People didn't know what they should be hiring. There was a weak flow of candidates, which is super relevant right now. When they had the candidates, there was a lack of ability to choose the right person. And the final thing is they lost the right candidates at some point in the process because they weren't able to sort of sell the role. In other words, the role didn't appeal that much. And what these guys did is they took this way of hiring and they identified a core methodology that did work. And in actual fact, a core methodology that turned that 50% failure rate into a 90% success rate. So that's what I'm going to run you through today. I'm going to run you through a process that makes hiring less of a coin toss and more of a, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get it right. I want to actually start off by also talking a little bit about some of the mistakes it recognized. Excuse the spelling there. I think I've got voodoo wrong. But they went through and they identified there's 9 common mistakes that people, hirers, interviewers make when they're hiring. And when I looked through this the first time, I kind of went through and went, yep, I've done that and I've done that, and I still could lapse into that. So this isn't about turning around and saying you are, you're this and this is your mistake. It's recognizing that at any point in the hiring process, I think we've all been guilty of one or more of these things. So the 9 are, they firstly identified the art critic as being one of the mistakes. And kind of like, somebody who walks into a fine art gallery and they look on the wall and they go, this is a beautiful painting. It's a masterpiece because of this, this, and this. And they can look at another one and go, no, that's, in other words, they were looking at the gut feel. And by the way, there's so many examples of fakes that have fooled expert, and similarly, pieces that were absolutely a masterpiece that nobody picked up on. I read an article recently of somebody who found a Jackson Pollock in a thrift store in the US, and they paid like $5 for it and ended up being worth 5 million. So there it goes to show you, right? Yeah. So this is the idea. The art critic believes that they can choose the right candidate based on gut feeling and by reading people. And the problem is 9 times out of 10, they fall prey to all of these confirmation biases that we know so well and ultimately end up making the wrong decision. So that's the art critic. I know I've been there. The sponge is generally someone who's too busy. I don't have time to do this. I'm so busy. I've got to get on with my work. So they defer the interviewing to others base their decisions based on other people's assessment alone. At some levels, that's going to be okay. At some levels, that's fine, particularly if the hiring decision is a decision that's better carried out by someone else in your team because they know the role better, they know what's needed. But ultimately, if you're deferring purely based on the fact that you are, there should be crosses actually, based on I don't have the time, ultimately, not good. The prosecutor is someone who treats interviewing like some opportunity to come in and aggressively, question candidates, you give them problems and all the rest of it. And generally, we know that that's the way companies like Apple and Tesla hire, which is great if you're looking to hire the most knowledgeable person. If you want to know the engineer who's the best engineer in the world, or you want to know the best computer guy or coder who's the best coder in the world, absolutely aggressively question them about engineering questions and problems. But it doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't work if the person you need is not the most knowledgeable candidate, it's the one who's best suited for the role. In other words, that'll get you smart people, it won't get you capable people. And there is a difference. The suitor is that person who goes into into interview and they're more interested in selling the business or talking about the business of complementary or how amazing is it, rather than actually sitting down and listening to the candidate and working out if it's a fit. The trickster generally relies on gimmicks that are supposed to test behaviors. Classic example is you leave the interview room and you drop a piece of paper on the floor, and if the person picks up the paper and puts it in the bin, guess what? They care about the company and they're a team player. If they leave it, they're not. That's not true. That's not going to give you a sense of whether somebody is right for the role. It's just going to teach you about whether or not they noticed or whether or not they're somebody who thinks, who cleans up. The animal lover is somebody who stubbornly holds on to these pet questions like, if you were a superhero, which superhero you'd be, thinking that question is going to reveal something unique, that important, something that's relevant to the role. In fact, it doesn't lack any relevance or scientific basis. The chatterbox is someone who comes in and their primary goal in an interview is to get on with the person. I want to know what makes this person tick. So we're going to have 2 hours of conversation. But at the end of the day, that's about establishing common ground. And it's based on the flawed assumption that this is going to be getting on with somebody, or sharing common ground is going to be a substitute for the ability to do work. And I've actually found that some of the best teams are people who have nothing in common with each other and wouldn't necessarily socialize extensively outside of work if they didn't work together. The tester is someone who relies overly on formal tests of aptitude, psychology, communication, DISC, HBDI, all of this stuff, and they use it as their primary decision-making method over interviewing. this stuff's important, but ultimately it's there to, these kind of tests are there to validate or undercut your assumptions about the character. And the fortune teller is somebody who goes into an appointment and invites candidates to predict the future. You know, what do you think the future of the industry? How do you see the future of our business? What do you see your role becoming? Ignoring the historical question of what the client has actually produced. So I want to put that out there because I reckon I look through that and there's at least 3, possibly even 4 mistakes that I have made in the past and I have a prevalence to go towards. I'm definitely can be a chatterbox. I definitely can be a sponge if I want to be. And I would definitely put it up and say that I probably have also had a tendency to be an art critic. But if you're doing those sort of things, I would strongly suggest that take that as your notice that this stuff has been proven not to work. And instead, let's get into what actually does work. So let's talk about the challenges if you don't get this stuff right as a business, or the challenges people face, more importantly, when they're recruiting. The first one, big challenge, is identifying the right people. I've had numerous experience, particularly in the last 2 years, of businesses who have gone out to recruit a team member or a staff member into their business, thinking that they needed somebody who could do this and this. And what they actually needed was someone who could do a completely different skill set. If you've done a role audit with me, you will know one of the main, if not the primary, well, the same thing, isn't it? Sort of factor in deciding what you hand off first is the amount of time it's going to get you back. There is absolutely no point hiring somebody for a role that is only going to see you hand off 5 hours worth of work a week. And the reason you're handing it off is because you don't want to do SOAs or you don't want to do this. I would rather you identify the role you can bring into the business that has got 30 to 40 hours worth of stuff that you can free up and hand over. And that's really the challenge. Identifying the wrong person is it's a very easy mistake to make. The second one is sourcing. And that's this particular problem right now. We're going to talk a little bit about sourcing later on. But the constant question is, where do I go? Do I go to Seek? Do I go to LinkedIn? And we're going to talk about what the research says, because this is going to be a real problem, particularly right now when there's not a great number of candidates coming in. Sorting is a big one. We're going to talk about interviewing, because a lot of the times the problem is getting into interview and not being able to select the right candidate, or even worse, you select the wrong candidate who ends up blowing your business up. And the more important the role, the more important it is to recognize that when wolf is in sheep clothing and whatnot. So sorting is really, really key. And ultimately, here's the thing. I once did an analysis personally of what a wrong hire had cost a business that I started work with. And when we broke it down in terms of the wages, the lost productivity that should have been there from this candidate, the time that was invested in training, the money that was spent on recruiting the person using a third party in the first place, and then the money that was required to re-recruit them, not to mention the downtime after that person left because the principal could no longer invest their time. This was a business that was turning over around about just over $1 million. That cost them $250,000. In other words, it's a bigger mistake than people realize. And whilst you look at that study that was done on the 1,300 interviews and the cost of the business costing 15 times their base salary, if we turn around and said the cost of a mistake of hiring the wrong person on $100,000 a year is $1.5 million. Now that might seem like a lot, but comparatively for a business, a large corporate that's making $100 million, right? A $1.5 million mistake, yeah, that's an error, but it's not a big one. For a business that's earning $1 million to make a $250,000 mistake, you can see how proportionally this is a big one. So sometimes I've done this with businesses in the past, and they say, this looks like a corporate thing. I don't need these many steps. And whilst I'm not going to suggest that you need to have 9 interviews like Google or anything like that, realizing that just because you're a small business doesn't mean that you should be less onerous or less not onerous, or less intensively pay attention to how you hire and be more cautious, less cautious. I think on the other thing is true. You should be more cautious, because the potential for the wrong hire in really getting in your way and flatlining that growth trajectory is probably higher for you as a small business than it is for anyone else. If you get this right, the good news is, though, you find the right person, the right fit, the right skill set. We'll talk a little bit about the fit in terms of value and skills, or values and skills. You match the right person to the role, and ultimately we activate that person. We get them excited, we get them in the role, and they go from 0 to 100 a lot faster. So, all right, let me run you through 5 key principles. And if you were to read the book, you would notice 4 of these are what they call the stages in the A method. But I'm going to break it down. I'm going to give you the stage. I'm going to give you the essence of it, and then we're going to get into the how. So the first stage in the process, the step that they call scorecard, I kind of talk about it scoping before seeking. If you've ever been shopping when you're hungry, you might notice that what tends to happen is you walk in, you go, okay, I've got my shopping list. I know what I need. Oh, Body Science chocolate bars, they're looking good. Yeah, they're good for me as well. Oh, I've never had cold pressed real milk that's unpasteurized. I'll get some of that because that'll be yummy. Oh, chocolate digestives. You know what? I might have one of those in the car on the way back. Oh, look at that. I love sushi. It's fresh. I'll grab some of that. And sure enough, what's happened, and before you know it, is you fill half the trolley out with stuff that wasn't on your list, purely because at that point in time, your drive was to eat yummy, often carbohydrate high, sugary food, whatever it might be. And the point I'm trying to make is sometimes the worst mistakes that businesses make in the hiring process is they go out and they're looking for candidates before they've actually worked out the specifics of what they need. In other words, they haven't got a role description. They don't understand the purpose of the role. They don't understand the outcomes they want. This, by the way, this doesn't work this isn't the case just for candidates. It sounds true for everything from software to finding a new licensee. Ultimately, if you don't know what it is specifically that you want, you don't know the role description, it's going to make it really hard to write. If you're going by a Seek or something like that, it's going to make it really hard to write the job advert in the first place. But secondly, it's going to mean that when let's say you do get a great response to your advert, you get a great response, you get a bunch of candidates coming through, you've got no means of assessing whether candidate A is better than B, let alone C, D, E, F, all the way to Z. So step one in the process is before you go anywhere near somebody, but even if you've got someone who comes to you and you go, oh, they're really capable, all the rest of it, make sure you sit down and work out, okay, what do I need in terms of the role? And equally importantly, what are the outcomes I need this person to solve? Because this is the benchmark upon which everything else that you're going to come later is going to come. So number one, absolutely start by scorecarding and scope out the role before you go looking for somebody. The second one is really about sourcing. Stage 2 in that process is source. And there's a whole bunch of insight. I'm going to give you some areas here. I mean, there's some options in there. You can go onshore, you can go offshore, you can go via sort of some of the job sites like Seek. You can go via Recruiter, and you can also look into your networks, both in terms of your digital networks and your personal networks. But here's the really important thing. I've worked with businesses in the past where they go, Stu, where should we go looking for candidates, right? And I'll give them 3 or 4 options or 4 or 5 options. And I'll go, okay, here's how you can use LinkedIn to find really good candidates. Here's the email for going out and approaching them. And here's how you write a job description. Here's how you ask BDMs if they know anybody. Here's how you put it out to your Facebook and your social networks. But the most important thing is I think you've got to go wide on this. Ultimately, and the point of this is to show you, this is a study done in 2011, so it's getting on a bit, but I think it's still relevant. And it's an analysis of the average experience and capability of candidates that are out there in the market. And again, this is average. And there's a lot of assumptions going on here. It's not going to be true for every candidate, but it's true for a lot of candidates. And the time those candidates are investing in going out and seeking new opportunities. In other words, particularly, this is obviously looking at it from LinkedIn's perspective. In other words, how often are these people going to be on the network or out there looking for a role and potentially getting exposure to your message that you're looking to recruit someone? And what we've identified is that there's 28% of the market out there who are usually the highest capability candidates who what we call super passive. And what are they looking for? They're looking for an extraordinary career move. In other words, they're the kind of people who are not looking for just a raise. They're not looking for just a new role. They're looking for something that they're going to learn. They're looking to work with the right people, because ultimately once, there comes a point in everyone's career once they've got a certain level of income where it's no longer about the income. It becomes about other things, if that makes sense. So they're 28% and they're out there looking. Then next in line, we've got the 40% who are what we call explorers, and they are not seeking an extraordinary career move. They're looking for the next career step or promotion upwards. And then we got the tiptoers, who are about 15%, and they're out there, they're kind of they're having a look out there, and they're seeking a better job. Now, underneath this line, that is 83% of the market who are typically going out there and they're passively looking for a role. They're not actively on their Seek. They're not sending out hundreds of resumes. They are kind of like, if they're looking at all, they're looking at in a very passive way. And then we've got down here, we've got 9% of what we call searchers and networkers who are either seeking a job or seeking to laterally move. In other words, I don't want the next role, I just want a different role. Maybe they need to move to a different area. And then down here, we've got hunters and posters, about 28% who are seeking a reasonable rate. I'm just realized those numbers, that should be 8%. That's my fault. That's not updated correctly. And there's 17% are active. So, and you can kind of see there's a link here between job returns. Up here, you're going to get people who are very capable of doing the right role. And down here, you're probably more likely to get people who aren't going to have the impact. So what does this tell you? This tells you that in order to reach these people around here, going and putting something on Seek isn't maybe not going to work as well. Posting an advert on LinkedIn, unless they're actually signed up, I'm interested in job opportunities, isn't going to work so well. So the source principle, and I'm going to show you the technique for it, is really about recognizing that if you're going to go out and find your great player, your next person who's going to really make a difference, it's not going to be about one thing. Chances are it's going to be about 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 different avenues. Let's go principle 3. This is step 3 in the inspired hiring process, and this is about the selection process. I'm going to go in this in detail because what you're going to notice is there's 4 separate interview stages or screening stages. And what's going to go through your head is, do I really need to do this? Can't I just do 1 interview or 2 interviews? And my suggestion to you, one of the sayings or concepts that's really, really helped me in coaching businesses when they're recruiting is this idea of the best approach to hiring is to hire slowly and fire quickly. What does that mean? It really means take your time to understand the person. Realize that when you're interviewing people, if you look at them as this person has the potential of literally taking 250K out of my business and parking me at my growth trajectory for a period of time if I get it wrong, but it could turbocharge the business if I get it right. That's going to encourage you to take it slowly and take it like you're running a hurdle race, and recognizing just because someone's running fast at the beginning and they look like a good candidate doesn't mean they're going to be the right candidate when they get over the second or the third or the fourth hurdle. That doesn't mean you have to do the 9 interview processes that Google do, but it does mean that taking your time, having certain hurdles to get over, and taking things with a bit more of a structured approach, even if it's a really good candidate, is going to be key. And similarly with the fire slowly, if you get them on board and you've been through that process and they are one of those 10% who just aren't a fit, then don't wait to see if somebody can do that. Oh, we'll give them a chance. We'll give them the opportunity. They come on board and you've been through this and you've assessed them and they're not doing it. They're not the fit. There's a good chance that somewhere along the process, you were either misled about their capability or it's not the right fit for the team. So that's principle number 3, stage number 3, which is select. Stage 4 in the process is the one I think that sometimes gets forgotten, but it's the sell. It's about selling. And really, this is about the idea that once you have taken someone through a process, once you are ready to offer them the job, you've got to sell it. You've got to really, really jump in and understand what is it that I can talk to this person about or pitch this person about the job. That means that day they kick in, they're going to be excited, they're going to be invested, they're going to be motivated to do the role. And most importantly, they're not going to get a week in and go, this isn't what I signed up for. Which leads nicely to the principle 4, which is my additional one, which is onboarding. I did a session earlier this year. It's on the members site under team. It's called the onboarding pathway. And to be really, really honest, if you get to the point where that person, you've sold it, you've got the right person, and they get into that first day and you haven't put together a pathway, an onboarding pathway for that person, it's like dropping the baton in the last 20 meters of the race. I've had that experience personally back when I was in corporate, of coming into a new role in a new team or a new rotation, a new team, and you come in and it's almost like they didn't know you were turning up. Nothing's ready. The computer's not ready. You don't know what you're working. You're picking up, and do you know what? It just sends out a message that this is not a serious business. And similarly, if you've hired the right person, they walk in and everything is ready. Even better, like how many times have you seen someone post on LinkedIn about a welcome hamper on their desk? It shows that they're excited. That is going to be the thing that takes someone from, I'm glad I'm here, to this is awesome, and boom, we get underway. So those are the 5 principles. How are we doing, gents, ladies? All good?
Yep, all good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Let's get into the how. There's a bit of it. There will be a workbook to follow this, but you don't need that right now. We're just going to walk through each of the tools and the templates and the approaches. And I'm going to introduce you to some ways of doing this. And I'm also going to introduce you to some additional concepts which are going to help. So let's talk about stage one, sourcing, finding candidates. Broadly speaking, if you look at it, if you're looking for a candidate, you can either go out and post an advert. You can commonly post an advert. People go on LinkedIn. Maybe they'll go to third-party recruiters. But in actual fact, as you can see, some of the research that comes out time and time again in terms of top channels for quality hires actually shows that there's a whole channel in there which is 9 times out of 10, or in most cases, in actual a quarter of the time, the most productive channel for getting good people in. This particular research piece is based on a 2017 survey done again by LinkedIn of around 4,000 talent acquisition decision makers to ask them, where did your quality hires? Now I've changed the numbers here because I don't know how they added this up, but 48% plus 46% plus 40% is definitely not 100%. But you can see the top source of quality hires in this study, nearly a quarter of hires came from employee referrals. Now, whether they're motivated to get a cash payment for this, I must admit, I once referred. Actually, you know what? Back in MLC days, I once referred Rachel through for a role, and I did it predominantly because I thought she was the right candidate. The lady who was managing the team, Paula, I really liked her, and I think she would do well with Rachel and her team. And I wanted to do Rachel a favor, and I ended up getting $1,500 out of the back of it. It wasn't my motivator, but I tell you what, it made me think twice, maybe pay more attention moving forward to who I knew that could be a good fit. So again, sometimes if you're looking for a person to hire, some of the best places to look is just go out to the people you work with and go, hey, this is who we're looking for. Do you know anybody? Third-party websites and online job boards actually came up as 23.4%. I would suggest that this is a 5-year-old survey, and I would expect that number to have dropped significantly. In fact, I know for a fact there are, I was having a conversation with one of the businesses on the program who posted a job, and in their own words, 3 or 4 years ago, they would have posted a job and had 50 to 60, maybe even 70 applications. Some of those applications would have been not great. They would have been possibly, people who'd recently come into the country who just didn't have the qualifications, people who didn't have the qualifications regardless of when they come into the country and that sort of stuff. But he said that this time around, he got 5 applications. And this is sort of indicative of what's going on in the industry right now. There's, whether you call it the big quit or there's just a lack of candidates coming in. Maybe there's a lot of foreign students or overseas students who've left the country and as a result aren't necessarily looking for roles, whatever it might be. I would suggest that's a lot less than it used to be. Social professional networks, again, the difference here is this is talking to people I actually work with. This is going out to the LinkedIn's or the Facebooks or maybe even the Instagram, maybe even TikTok, who knows. Third-party recruiters, I would again suggest that's dropped considerably, mainly because of the cost. And then there's internal hires as well, which is about 14%. But what you can take from that is, I talk to business. I know a lot of businesses, when they have a hire, the first thing they'll do is they'll go to Seek and they'll put a job on there. Some businesses who I speak to, and we have that conversation about how to mine LinkedIn for potential candidates, they might go and do that. But I'll tell you what, most of them don't, which is concerning. Some businesses would rather just go and pay a third-party recruiter. I would suggest that sort of not enough businesses go down these 2 routes to make it really, really worth. So sourcing. I had this conversation just as part of the peer groups yesterday. For me, the best way to approach this is before you go out and write the application for Seek, sit down and make a list of 10 contacts that you could ask. Who are the most talented people that I know I should consider hiring? They might be people who come in. BDMs are a great source for this. There's a business I spoke to just yesterday who operate in quite a niche space in the industry. And I said to them, they tried to go overseas. It's not really working for them. And I said, well, hold on a minute. If you work in a niche space in this industry, in other words, the type of advice you're giving is very specialized, could you make a list of 10 other businesses that do what you do? And then he said, yeah, I could do that. I said, well, this list, you've got 2 options. You can go and have a conversation with them and ask the question, how are you resourcing up your business? Are you using outsourced providers? And do you know what? If a business isn't in direct competition with you, which 9 times out of 10, if you're operating in a really small niche space and you're not geographically competitive, and there's a plenty of market out there, collaboration is going to be the usual thing, but you can have that conversation. Or alternatively, you could just take that information and go and do a LinkedIn search for anybody that may have that particular company in their employment history. So again, we could have a whole conversation. We could have a thing about, do you go seeked or do we do, what is the average third-party recruiter charging these days, and what's the way to do it? But I'll tell you now, this is going to shift. Sources of candidates changes. If we go back 2 or 3 years, if you wanted to outsource, Cebu in the Philippines was a great place to go. There were some great candidates. There was a real growth. There was still, you go there now, and it's become ultra competitive. And I'd probably argue that the availability of the candidates isn't as great as it once would. Jen, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that sort of stuff. Whereas there's businesses that are like some of the businesses that previously were over in India, Valenta. Previously people were like, yeah, not so good, are now sort of coming up, and there's other areas. So it's always a moving feast where you source candidates for, but I guarantee you, sitting down and just making that list of 10 people and not just treating it like an event, but treating it like an ongoing thing. Remember a while ago, American Express, this is back when I was in corporate, they had this habit of just tapping people randomly on the shoulder and having this sit down conversation, which wasn't quite a hire. And they'd have this list of talent that could potentially join their business moving forward, and then keep contact. So sourcing for me, make it an ongoing thing. Build a network of contacts that you can ask, identify new ones, and constantly looking for those talent for all of the reasons we said earlier around the best people are often not actively looking, but if the right career opportunity pops up, they will have that conversation, and the ROI on that kind of hire is particularly high. Hopefully this is useful. Cool. Step 2, scoping. This is covered in detail in the module, the onboarding pathway. So I'm only going to go through it quickly because this really talks about how to sort of write that role description. And to be frank, the best way to write a role description or identify what should be in it is a role audit. Unless you specifically know without any shadow of a doubt the person you need to hire, and you know the ROI on that person, or you're replacing somebody, then doing a role that is key. But if we break it down, I'll just give you some tips. This is how I write role descriptions. It's simple, it's clear, it works pretty well. It gives you the basis of writing adverts. When it comes to role title, as I said, try to avoid gimmicky titles. Don't. If you have this sudden, urge to advertise for a head of customer awesomeness or a king of investment guruism, please avoid it, because most serious candidates are not. Then they're not interested in internal role descriptions. They're interested in roles that are benchmarked against industry norms. And in addition, particularly if you're looking for, if you're going down the seek route, treat it like a keyword search thing. If your job advert is not likely to come up in a Google search, if the candidate Googles for the role they want, then don't use that role title. The next thing I like to sort of put out is what kind of person, in other words, the kind of person you're seeking, what kind of prior experience would they have? And this is going to become really important when we get down to the hiring bit. So the kind of question I ask is, what are the roles in our industry that they might have previously done? What are the roles do you see as a natural feeder into this one? And I'm going to show you more on this in a second with a model called the apprentice progression. In other words, there are certain roles that will come just before the person starts to look for the current role. So for example, often paraplanners will be looking for a step into advisor. Often administrative staff will be looking for a role into paraplanning. Often review advisors will be looking for a role into principal or managing advisors. And I'll give you more information on that in a second. What roles outside the industry do you think might port across nicely? You might need an operations manager. Now, that operations manager doesn't necessarily have to have a role in financial services, but a role where they are deeply involved in managing complex data collection and working with the workflow system. Maybe they work in maybe they've worked in legal before. Maybe they have worked in accounting. Again, what are the roles across the industry that you might be able to port across nicely? What educational requirements do you need them to have? Really important, for example, if you're looking for an advisor who's already got their FASIO or whatever it might be. And also ask that question of any life experiences that might be useful to have. For example, do you want someone who has run a business in the past? Do you want someone who has worked in corporate? Do you want someone who's worked in small business? All really important. Role responsibilities, for me, again, grab your role audit. Do the role audit, grab the most important things you need to hand off and put them in there that makes it really simple. And finally, the piece that I like to put in there in terms of personal values. This is kind of where you can outline all those important competencies or innate and learned skills or aptitudes. So things like, I want someone who is naturally efficient, honest, has good organization integrity, is good organizational planner, is a systems thinker. They're aggressive, they follow through on commitments, they get on well in a team environment, they have the ability to hire other people well, or they manage people. You get the idea. This is where everything goes about the kind of person I want to hire. So yeah, you've got the, this is what they will have done. This is what their role is, and this is the kind of person I want. You get those right, you'll have a pretty clear scope. I want to talk just quickly before we move on. Apprentice progression. You can use this model as well. I'll put it in. This will be in the slides. It'll also be in the workbook. But generally, this was a model I developed with a business who was looking to bring through staff from certain roles smoothly and really paint an expectation around the skill set that they need to develop along the way. Similarly, they were looking to go out into the marketplace and be able to hire people who maybe had got stuck working for other businesses and be able to sit down with them and say, well, you're there. If you join us, we can take you here. And these are the steps. And it's based on the idea that if you're going to go all the way in an advice business, ultimately the end game is you want to be able to be like a creator, someone who can run their own business, they own equity, they're an award-winning advisor, there's significant financial security, they're working with clients they love, all of those sort of stuff. But if you go all the way from the beginning, it starts by becoming a really good support person, being good at admin, which is really about learning how the system works. And again, we've got a whole bunch of things about focus. Your goal in this stage is to become accurate, efficient. These are the kind of results they'll be getting, activities, KPIs. I won't go into that detail around that. I'll leave you to go through it if you want to. Someone who is in administration and they've learned the system, their next phase might be to, okay, now you've learned the system, let's get you in a paraplanning role where you understand the advice. And the goal here is for them to master the detail. They're accurate and efficient, now they master detail. At this point, someone who's in that role, if they want to go further, the next phase they'd go to is becoming an associate. And the first step is to learn how to support, which is to be able to step in and deal with clients as needed. And the goal here is really to get to know the clients in the business. Once you become a supporter, you go into becoming a managing advisor and a managing associate, which is to become the key contact, which is where you keep clients on track, keep them informed. At that point, the next phase, you go from being an associate to being a principal. First stage is to advise, where you lead the relationship, giving great advice. You then move into what I call the coach phase, which where you start to develop other team members, and you start to make it look easy before you go into that final phase. So again, a really good way, if we look back at the scoping, is to understand, particularly, if you're looking for someone who is an associate advisor, you might turn around and say, well, I want somebody who the kind of roles they've already done is they will have been in a paraplanning role where they've mastered the detail, and they might have already come through an admin role. Similarly, if you're looking to recruit an advisor, being very, very clear about if you bring on board someone who's predominantly been an associate, expecting them to come in and kind of just suddenly go out there and bring in new clients and grow the client base and market and network, that might not be their next phase, and there might be an education or a development piece in there. That makes sense? Hopefully it does. I want to talk about types of players as well, or types of team members, because we can talk about the role description, we can talk about the phase of growth, but it's equally important to kind of understand that you want to hire somebody who's at the right place and they're going to produce the right results, as well as they're going to fit in with the team. There are so many different ways of analyzing teams. And as a coach, I've sometimes come in, and one of the things I tend to do when I start working with a business, we might have a plan, we might know what the projects are, but I want to get a feel for the team. I want to get a feel for how the principal manages the team, how the team respond, who does what. And sometimes putting it in place or analyzing a team using certain frameworks is really, really useful. One of the frameworks I really like to use is simply to classify everyone into saboteurs and advocates. An advocate is someone in the team who generally is supportive. They push the team in the right way. They're all constantly trying to do things better. Saboteurs are those who they just cause problems. They're constantly sort of, you put something to the team and they'll come up with 100 reasons why they shouldn't do it. And the general rule of thumb is, it doesn't matter how smart, how capable, how driven someone who's in the saboteur space. If someone is a saboteur, they will by definition blow the rest of the business up. And it's kind of like rowing a boat and someone's just sat there we're in the water doing nothing. So 9 times out of 10, when I analyze it, you got to work out what to do with the saboteurs. Another thing to understand is you said to me a while ago, which is to understand that any time there is a problem with an individual in a team environment or not producing, 9 times out of 10, actually 95% of the time, the problem is significance. In other words, it's often the problem is that someone believes that their level of importance or, the recognition they're receiving or what they should be paid, it should be there and it's down there. And similarly, often that's the case with saboteurs. And you've got to make a decision then as a business owner, whether or not you want to, give that person the significance. In other words, give them the enhanced level of responsibility, and sometimes, bite your tongue, or alternatively, if you don't, and 9 times out of 10, the problem is regardless of how capable are, they need to go on to a new phase. Often it's the case where people have been in a business for a long, long time and there's been a lot of change coming around them. That's when they sometimes fall into a saboteur category. But this one is also really important, and it's about analyzing a team across 2 key metrics. The first is drive and attitude. In other words, their capability to get things done, work in a self-directed way. And they're either going to be, low drive, low attitude, or high, and their capability of knowledge. The A player, we'll start from A. It goes from A, B, C, D. An A player is a candidate who not only has the right knowledge and capability, but they have the right attitude. They're driven to do things. They're not going to wait around for someone else. They're not going to try and fight the manager. They are performers. And it's that kind of combination of skills and capability and mindset that enables this person to, they've got a 90% chance of achieving outcomes that only those 10%. These are the unicorns. These are the ones that if you can get the A players and bring them in, they will change your business. B players, I really like B players too. B players are candidates who have not yet got the skills and experience to replicate A player performance, but they have the right drive. So with the right training, mentoring, they will over time become an A. And again, when it's funny in corporate, a lot of people talk about hiring for fit or hiring for values. And I agree to some degree that I would rather hire somebody who has the right drive, right attitude, and skill them up to become an A player than someone who just hasn't got the right fit. The difference is in corporate, they have the time and the structure and the people to do the training. And sometimes in small business, if you hire an over concentration of people who need training and you don't have the time to training, you end up with very capable people who really want to do right, but you don't have anything for them and they end up leaving. So again, for small business, the rules are slightly different. I think you do need to look to hire people who already have the capability, but and look sort of drive and attitude and values as being an important thing, but not the main driver. We then get down to the bottom half, C players. Candidates who on paper, they've got the right knowledge, the right capability to produce A performance, but due to a lack of drive or the wrong attitude, are unlikely to be so. Sometimes people can just sit in C because there's something going on in their life. And often you'll have A players who drop into C for a period and you kind of, it's going to be temporary and they'll pop back up. But ultimately, if you've got someone who's been in C for a while, typically the drive is the issue. And then you've got D players, experienced candidates who just lack the skills and experience. They're never going to produce they don't have the ability to replicate the performance. And because they don't have the drive or the attitude, they're probably not going to be able to develop. Now, why is this important? This is important because of this golden rule. As a general rule, A players prefer to play with other A players and work with a certain number of B players who are willing to learn. What they don't like doing is working with C's and D's. So what happens if you have an over concentration of C's and D's? The A's and the B's leave. Really important when you're going through and you're having a look at candidates, you're scoping the role. Be mindful of that. The game is to maximize in your business the number of A players and the number of B players. And I think I've worked with a number of businesses, and you can spot the A players, you can spot the B players from a mile off. So that's a really key thing to do. Okay, final thing on scoping. I think that one of the biggest challenges is once you've got the role scope and you go out there to market and you start getting these candidates come back, it can be difficult to try and work out which are better on paper. Ultimately, a lot of the time when you're looking at candidates, it's not an objective thing, it's a subjective thing. And one of the most important things that you can do is take the analysis piece from being just Sue kind of looks better than Dave, but Dave also does that, and make it into something you can analyze. This is a weighted analysis tool, and it's something that I've done with software. I've done with businesses who are trying to choose a licensee. I've actually done this when trying to choose a holiday to go on and a whole bunch of stuff. And it involves sitting down and getting really, really clear on what are the most important criteria for the role. So say that we're hiring an operations manager. And I sit down and I go, okay, what's really important to me when it comes to the criteria? Well, I want someone who's got previous experience. That's really important to me. I want someone who is detail orientated. I want somebody who has experience using workflow software. What else is really important to me? Great communicator. By the way, I usually like to have 7 of these. And the reason is 7 gives you a number that it becomes really hard, like particularly the next phase you go through when we're going to assign points. If you've got 7 and you've got 100 points to assign, you've really got to do some critical thinking where if it's 100, if you've got 10, not only is it too many, but also it can make it easier to sort of compliance. So where are we at so far? Great communicator. I want someone who can manage upwards. I want somebody who, what else is really key to me? Previous experience. I want someone who has shown themselves to be a systems thinker. And I want somebody who, what else is really important to me? Somebody who has life experience. In other words, they've done things. Okay. So therefore, I've got my 7 categories. My next phase, I'm going to go through and say, well, what's the most important thing in there? I reckon for me, the most important thing would be detail orientated. So I've got 100, it's a percentage weighting. I'm going to say that's 30% of my decision. What's next? Workflow software, that's not that important. I'm going to have 5%. Great communicators, key. Previous experience, I'm going to go with 10%. What have we got so far? 65. Systems thinker, I want 15. What have we got? Manage up was 10% life experience. Okay. So that's my criteria. Let's say I've now got 2 candidates to choose between, Jen and Stu. Previous experience in working with an operations manager. And by the way, I always make this a score out of 5. The reason being, if you give someone a score out of 10, they'll usually choose 7 or 6. If you give 5, they've got to make a decision. Previous experience, Jen, I give her a 5. Stu, never done it. So then I give it the weighting. I go, okay, 5 times 10% is 0.5, times 10% is 0.3. Actually, that should go like this. I'm doing this according to times 10%, because it's 10%, gives me a 0.5, times 10% gives me a 0.3. You getting the idea? Detail orientated, Jen, 5, Stu's at 2, definitely, times 30%. I think that's 1.5. And there we've got equals times 10% equals 1. You get the idea. And what you go through is you go through and give people a score, and you're going to add up. And let's say at the end of it, Jen's got a score of 6.7. And so I don't think it comes out. Actually, it would be a score. Jen's overall score would be 4.2 and Stu's would be 3.6. And what that does is it gives me the ability to step away from whether Stu's a nice guy or whether Jen, and analyze that person's suitability against a very specific range of criteria, and most importantly, a range of criteria that I've weighted according to what I think is going to be the success, the requirements for success in this role. Sometimes this can be sometimes, to be honest, when you do this, it's not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but what it will do is it will affirm your gut call. It'll affirm what you think, or it will force you to challenge some of your assumptions. So again, when you're scoping the role, sitting down and choosing those 7 to 10, if you absolutely must, I would suggest 7 categories, weighting them. Then when you come to screening the candidates, it's going to give you this framework you can come back to either confirm why you deep down feel like this candidate is the right candidate over that one, or alternatively, challenge some of your flawed assumptions as to who is the best candidate. Cool. Keep going. How are we doing? Right. Screening. Now I'm going to run through this relatively quickly. I mentioned at the beginning that the process outlined in the A method was pretty clear about the fact how important it was to take the interview, the screening slowly. And I know that many of you will look at this and go, this seems like a lot. You may choose to integrate some of these. For example, the screening interview can be something that you can do as like a form submission. Every person who submits an application just goes through, clicks on this link, goes through to a jot form, fills in 4 questions. That would work. You may be able to combine the grading interview with the focused interview, but I just want to put it out there. This is the process that has resulted in 90% success rate. This is the process that allows businesses to really get underneath whether a candidate is right. And if you choose to just get rid of some because you feel like it's too much, I want you to really inquire, why is it that you're jettisoning that, and is it the right thing to do? Obviously, the other thing to say is that certain roles, like if I was hiring an advisor, I would go through all 4 of these, particularly if it was a senior advisor. However, if you're hiring somebody just to build a website for you, maybe not so much. So the first one, screening interview. Again, this can be done over the phone. It could be done by a third party. If you're hiring someone, it could be done as a form. But really, this is about asking people the question: what are your career goals? So give the candidate the opportunity, them the first word, so they can tell instead of you telling them about the company, so they can parrot about what you said, find out what if they know what they want. And for me personally, I've had conversations with a number of people down the years where you ask this question and you know straight away whether someone is approaching this from a career, from I'm committed, or whether they're just looking for the next role. What are you good at professionally? Give examples. I suggest push your candidate to give a number of positives. Again, the amount of detail they can go into is going to give you a sense of whether this person is the real deal or whether they are sort of just coming at this from a high level, not a lot of experience. What are you not good at or not interested in? Please give examples. Again, if a candidate's not able to answer this, it means that they've either not prepared. If they give weaknesses like strengths, they say, well, my biggest weakness is I'm a perfectionist, or my biggest weakness is shoes. They could be deal killers. In particular, if you see any deal killers, if they turn around and say, look, I'm not very good with detail, and you need someone who's good with detail, that could be your screening out. And again, I like to ask this question: how would each of your last 3 to 5 bosses rate your performance when we talk to them? And I think the use of when we talk kind of gives them, rather than if, it sends out the message that the candidates, they need to be honest and truthful. So step 1, the screening interview is going to give you a sense of who you want to take to the next level. The second interview, which is called the grading interview. Now, what's key about this is I used to go in and I used to start by trying to interview and get to know the person, right? Talk about their career, talk about their values. And when I started doing it this way, in other words, rather than talk about any of that sort of stuff, I would pull up their resume or their CV or their LinkedIn profile, and we would go through it in detail. I just got this sense straight away as to whether this person is going to be able to do the role. And do you remember I talked about the importance for me of, in small businesses, the most important factor, fit is important, values are important, but there are certain times you need to hire someone who can do the job. Because if they can't do the job, you need to train them. And if you don't have the time to train them, they're not going to be able to do the job. So this is about pulling out their resume and starting with the education, going through and say, what are your high and low points of each educational item as far back as you deem relevant? If you don't think their secondary school education is relevant, you can get rid of it. But I think definitely including continuing professional development, university degrees, or any recent educational requirements versus like FASIA is absolutely vital, particularly if you're employing advisors. Then it's about going through employment. Go through each role in detail as far back as you think it remains relevant. So, for example, that pub job at uni might not be relevant, but the Macca's job they had when they were 16, particularly if you're hiring an operations manager, could be very relevant. And asking these questions: what were you hired to do? Which is going to give you an idea of what their role was really about. What accomplishments are you most proud of? A players will talk about outcomes and expectations. B and C players will talk about events, people, or other aspects of the jobs they like, and they won't focus as much on results. Biggest giveaway of B and C players is when you ask them to outline accomplishments, they can't. They'll just talk about what they did. What were some low points during that job? Don't let them off the hook. Keep pushing until they talk about the lows, because that'll give you a lot of sense of them as individuals. I'll talk about red flags and green flags in a second. Who were the people you work with? What kind of work environment did you work in? How did it work? What would they say about working with you? This is trying to understand whether you can get the best out of them, whether you're the right manager, how they performed as part of a broader team, whether they're going to fit in well in your working environment, how well do they play with others? Why did you leave? It's really vital to know whether they left that role because they were successful, which is usually a sign of an A player, or whether they were pushed out of the job by a boss who didn't value their contribution. And again, recap: what are your career goals for the future? It might seem like repetition, but it's a really good way to check whether the candidate's consistent about what they want, and therefore whether they're being honest about it. Cool. Not long yet, ladies and gents. So let's say you get past this and you've got the candidates. Again, this is one where you can combine them. But if you've got a lot of candidates, separating these two out, particularly if you can do it remotely, is going to work just fine. The purpose of this interview is kind of to drill down. Let's say there's 2 or 3 or 4 areas that you kind of want to really understand. Does this person really know how to manage workflow? Does this person really understand how to go out and generate new leads? Is this person really capable of working with high net worth clients? Can this person really manage client relationships without oversight? So you're going to focus down on the most important competencies and their ability to deliver the right outcomes. And again, You would really now dive down to the detail. You want to know the ins and outs of their biggest accomplishments. So technology, what did you use? How did you implement it? How did you optimize? How did you master it? How did you get the team using it? The results, what business outcomes did you help facilitate? How much did you charge clients? How did you do this? What were the timeframes? From compliance, what were you actually responsible for? How did you manage this in the day-to-day? Was it tricky? How did it end? People, how did you deal with staff when it came to hiring, training, motivating? And again, what are the biggest mistakes and lessons you learned in these areas? You're looking to really understand here how self-aware this person is, how they've developed as an individual from role to role, how their role developed, how they were promoted, how they weren't promoted, and importantly, what level of control over those outcomes they actually had, which is where we start to get to the heart of whether this person was actually responsible or not. Final thing, it's kind of an interview, but it's more of a screening. One of the things that's really important to do is get references. Don't ever skip references. References are really key because they're going to tell you as much about the individual in terms of validation as the whole process so far, or they're going to give you that opportunity to circle back and really ask some questions. Start by picking the right references. As I said there, I think you want a selection of some bosses, some peers, some subordinates is great. And you want people who are either going to confirm what you've learned is right. In other words, this person was great at managing people. They were good at managing upwards. They drove results in the business. They nailed the management of the system, or they're going to bust open wide truths. I think it's good to ask the candidates to contact the reference to set up the call, so you don't have to be do you know who I am? Do you know why I'm calling? It shouldn't take much for a candidate to go, hey, just want to let you know they may be calling you. And personally, I think 4 is a good number. A lot of people go for 3. I think 3 is not enough. 3, you'll get a boss, you might get a subordinate, you might get but with 4, you're definitely going to have to get at least, a person from another business. And I think it's really, in what context did you work with so-and-so? What were their biggest strengths? What were their biggest areas for improvement? How would you rate their performance on a 1 to 10 scale? What about their performance causes you to give that rating? And the person mentioned you struggle with certain area in this job. Can you tell me more about that? People would generally not give a negative reference, as you know. So pay really close attention to what people say, what they don't say, and how they say it. Because generally, if someone hesitates or they're overly non-specific with the truth, they might be avoiding saying something critical for a whole bunch of reasons. Cool. Let me give you some red flags and green flags, and then we'll get on to the final part of this. These are just a few things that if you're interviewing and they come up, I'd look out for them. People who boast about achievements that don't matter much. People who, particularly if they boast about winning, and you look at that and go, really? That's really petty. Somebody in a conversation, if you're putting out ideas and they're going, yeah, I totally agree, this is what I would do, and they're just hitching their ideas to you, you're probably speaking to someone who's very good at selling and is trying to sell you. People who start sentences with no, but, however, during the interview process. People who are who constantly are telling you how smart they are, but they can't actually back it up with examples. Anybody who speaks poorly about previous colleagues and they want to talk at length about how they were treated poorly, that's usually a flag for me. People who pass the buck, make excuse for performance. People who start comments with "that's just me," or with the greatest of respect, they're usually probably not going to get on with people. Unable to present past failures or lessons that cannot be blamed on others. The reason we didn't get there is because of this, or the reason that we didn't achieve that is because of this person. Anybody you discover that has exaggerated past achievements or taken credit for work of other people, for me, that's a straight off the bat. That's a deal breaker. Anybody who seems more interested in the compensation, benefits, or working hours and doesn't ask enough questions about the role. And anybody who can't explain why they've changed jobs, moved careers in any sort of detail is also a bit of a red flag. Green flags. And this is key because sometimes the best candidates are not always the ones that will sell themselves best. So I'd keep an eye out for these. People who can state their achievements in really clear terms and correctly assign credit with teams and individuals. In fact, people who are more likely to talk about the team, by definition, as you'd expect, are often going to be team players. People who listen and speak only when they've finished being addressed or asked a question. In other words, they're not constantly interrupting. They can provide structured explanations about how they achieved outcomes and how they fulfill their duties. They talk about past failures, but they don't go into deep criticism or giant blame to others. They're on their best behavior. They can talk about how they went putting plans into action without hesitation. In other words, they don't stop on just the plan. They're open and direct. They don't attempt to be overly familiar. The only people who are going to be overly familiar and really excited to see you for no apparent reason are salespeople, and not very good ones at that. They can provide references easily, and it doesn't take a while. They take an interest in who they're going to be working with and the day-to-day experience of the role, and they show signs that of being done in their career pathway and their resume that they've been invited to do work that is typically outside of their initial scope. Cool. One more, and then I'm going to break it down. The final phase in this, don't forget, once you've been through this process, you've got a clear idea of the person want to hire. You had a bunch of candidates gone through. You've put them through a process that will give you clarity, and also, you know what? It's going to feel thorough to them, which is key. The final stage is you need to pitch the role to them. You need to make sure that you get them engaged and excited, so they come on board and they're ready. They're ready to go as well. It's funny. It's funny. I had a conversation just recently. It's not criticism of the person, but they had a person in their business that they have earmarked as being a future equity holder. And as I was chatting, I just got this gut feel. I was like, well, is this person actually on board? Do they know they're a future equity holder? So I asked the question. I said, just want to check, how does this person feel about, being the future equity holder of the business? And the answer came back and said, yeah, I think they feel pretty good about it. And I was like, okay, what did they want though? And sure enough, the answer came back, well, I'm not really sure because I've never had this conversation. And I think that is the most powerful conversation or thing you can look to learn from this process. If you've got employees that have been with you for a while, even if, for me, every 12 months, every 6 months, have this conversation. What are you getting what you need from this? Is the role still fulfilling what you want? What else do you want? Is there anything that's become more important? Don't guess it. If in doubt, have this discussion, particularly if you're getting to that phase where you want to pitch the role and you really want to get them on board. Have the discussion, as it's always going to be personal, and what works for one person, can be a complete disincentive to other people. Really. Some person might want X. I might want 4. You're going out there pitching, it's going to be fun. And the person's going, yeah, but I'm not being paid what I need to. Similarly, the person, you might be throwing money at somebody who's actually more important than being part of something and having work-life balance. But generally, it's going to fall into one of 5 categories. You are going to sell the role based on the fit to the candidate. Fit is about showing the candidate how their goals, their values, their talents fit into your business's vision, strategy, and culture. In other words, they're going to feel at home. Very important to a lot of people. Fortune. I'm going to be really honest. Most people will have a financial requirement to some degree. And I guess this is your opportunity to show people how being part of their business is going to fulfill their aspirations as to what they earn. And there is potential for it to further progress if that's where they want to get to. Fun is often about the cultural aspect of your office, the social aspects. It could be the beanbag and ping pong factor, which we see it in corporate, in tech startups. The kind of people they want to attract are coders. They've got high levels of skills. They want to be part of something. They want to have fun. Make it tangible though. If you're sitting there and talking to your staff about, well, on Friday we have this quiz and everybody wears funny hats, that might not be the tangible or the fun they're looking for. They want to know that they're going to enjoy coming to work. Family is about making sure that you've got an environment and a role that offers benefits to someone's wider family, maybe through lifestyle relocation. If you're out there, you're out there on the coast, or you're in a regional area, you could potentially make that a point of difference for somebody who's sick of working in Sydney and sick of paying, massive rents or whatever it is. It might be working hours. It might be the ability to work from home. It might be, a whole bunch of stuff. I've known businesses out there who, MLC back in the day had a childcare facility in the building. And I tell you what, that was a motivation for a lot of people. And freedom offers candidates, in particular A players, the means to kind of operate without micromanagement, to develop the skills they want to work on things that attract them, and ultimately to prove their worth on their own terms. So drill down on what's really important to those candidates, and then make sure you're pitching the role, where the business is going, and making sure it's aligned to which of those really matter. Cool. So that is a expansive and detailed look at what I think is one of the most important skills that is worth developing, particularly as your business grows. But frankly, if you can hire the right person from that very first hire, you can get the right person, the person who has the skills that you don't, the skills that you need, who works with you in a way and you can keep them long term, it is just going to make such a difference that compared to a business that is constantly hiring the wrong people and can't retain them and a whole bunch of other things. So what's your action plan here? Well, for me, the action plan is number one, understand what you need. Depending on where you're at as a business, you may need a role. And sometimes this can be about what's my next hire? What's my next 2 hires? Looking ahead is the key part. Like if you're trying to hire at a certain point in time, you need that hire right now. It's going to be too late and you're always going to be driven to accept something. Number 2, I would stock take your sources. If all you've ever done is gone out there and hire via Seek, I'd ask this question. Have I ever spoken to my employees about the connections they might have? Have I got a big enough LinkedIn network full of people who potentially could be future employees? Have I ever explored whether or not hiring via a recruitment source is the right way to go? The only time you're looking at your sources of new hires is when you need to hire, you're going to be limited in terms of options. I think number 3 is review your interview, your screening process. There's a lot there. But I think being able to grab some of these templates, put them in your kit box and know, okay, when we're putting the next person out, we're writing the job description, we're going to follow this process and work out what you are going to do and what you aren't going to do and lean on the process for making the decision, I think is really key because there's a lot of content here, but this will give you a method of doing it. I think number 4 is really about making sure you understand your pitch, and ensure you have an onboarding pathway. If you don't have an onboarding pathway and you hire somebody, you can put all this work into this hiring process. And guess what? You're going to come on board and potentially you could lose them. Modules, role audit's really good here. Onboarding pathway is the other one I've mentioned. I'm sure there's a few more, but that should give you more than enough. And again, as always, if you are going through the process and you want to run sort of, is this the right role? What do you think of my sources? Can I just run you through how I'm going to approach my interview process? Or can I run through my pitch? Yeah, more than happy to run through it with you in a coaching session or even drop in, because I think grabbing this and turning it into your process is really, really key. Cool. That's it from me. Hopefully this has been useful. Shoot me through an email if you have any questions. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed the module Inspired Hiring, and I will see you soon. Take care. So there we have it, another episode of the Finnovator under the wing, in the back pocket, whatever you want to call it. That one was Inspired Hiring. And although it's one of those areas that I guess in small business, often we kind of just approach hiring as do it on gut feel. Hopefully you got from that the data indicates that often this is a big hole for a lot of businesses, and having a system around it, having a methodology, understanding, the data, what it tells us about good hiring, and most importantly, I think having a mechanism for scoping out the right role up front is key. The number of times I've sort of come into situations and we've had to sort of change some of the hiring, and instead of hiring something based on all those bits and pieces that certain people in the business didn't want to do, instead hire based on the ability to actually get somebody who is going to enable you to get back a bunch of time, which is what that role audit tool that I mentioned at the beginning is all about. As always, if you want to access some of the additional content around this, success.ourdairy.com.au, join our community and you'll get the ability to check it out, as well as get a bit more information about some of the subsidiary tools like Role Audit and Finsight and Fee Modeler that support a lot of the things that I've spoken about today. That's it from me. As always, it would be a massive thing for me if you could just take a moment to leave a review, ideally 5-star. Just put some comments in there, let other people know what this is all about and your experience of it and who you would recommend it for. That's it from me. I will see you again next week with another episode of The Finnovator. See you later.